Perfect. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is about transforming business payments in the care industry. I'm Pav, and I'm part of the business payments team at Modulr. I work with accountants and businesses to streamline payment processes by automating payments, improving cash flow, and providing tailored solutions. For those who are not familiar, Modulr helps businesses automate payments from payroll to supplies and taxes, making them faster, easier, and more secure. Trusted by thousands across the UK and Europe, we process over 200 million payments annually and integrate with key networks like Faster Payments and Bax. We're also partnered with platforms like Xero, Sage, and BrightPay. With FCA and European regulatory oversight, our platform lets you focus on your business while we handle payments efficiently and reliably. We also have Victoria from Equalis Tax and Richard from Care England here with us today. I'll hand over to them to introduce themselves. Victoria, did you want to start?
Yeah, no problem. Hi everyone, I'm Victoria, the founder of Equalis. I have over 16 years experience in the payroll and accountancy industry, and we work with care businesses nationwide, providing a streamlined accountancy, payroll and payment service via Modulr.
Hi, and I'm Richard Ayres. I'm a social care advisor at Care England. My background is sort of 25 years in procurement, 10, 11 years in care provision, both in home care and care homes. I've worked with Care England for over 11 years. I've worked for them for nearly the last 4 years. And my role is taking the operational complexities of running care services and embedding those into the lobbying team and the policy team at Care England.
Lovely. Thank you, Victoria and Richard. We're glad to have you both here with us today. Great. So let's get started. As I mentioned just now, today's webinar is about transforming business payments in the care industry. As we all know, the care industry provides crucial services to the vulnerable, and it's really important to make their processes as simple as possible. Today, we are going to explore the current state of payment processes in the care industry, discuss some of the challenges faced with traditional payment methods, and explore how digitizing this process can benefit the industry. So let's jump into the first question. This is one for you, Richard. What are some of the overarching challenges that the care industry is currently grappling with beyond and with payment processing?
Okay, so I think the main challenges that we've got at the moment are really around the funding crisis. We've got a lack of funding from central government. We've got some huge black holes within the care sector. We've got a large number of providers who are funded primarily by the public purse, and local authorities have not been funded sufficiently by the current government to be able to pay care providers to fund care appropriately. So there's a huge funding gap. Workforce gaps are also the other gap. We've got a workforce crisis, and whilst we've seen those numbers come down recently due to the fantastic support from migrant workers who have really helped transform the sector in terms of workforce perspective, with the government shutting down some of those streams and routes for people coming into the country, it means that crisis is probably going to expand again over the next 12 months or so. In terms of payment processing, we've got 153 local authorities and 42 NHS ICBs that commission services into residential and domiciliary care and various different other care services. And these have a myriad of different ways of working. So from a payment processing perspective, whether you're dealing with over 250,000 self-funders nationally, 153 local authorities and 42 ICBs that have a myriad of different ways in which to transact and interact with payments, or whether you're paying your staff in different ways, these are some of the challenges and hurdles that we face on a day-to-day basis.
Of course. Thank you so much for that. And Victoria, how does that look like from, an accounting point of view?
Yeah, I can completely agree with Richard. From what I've seen in the care industry, there's like a vicious circle that arises. Obviously, lack of invoices being paid on time, causing cash flow issues, and therefore companies cannot always afford to upgrade their systems and use technological advances to streamline the business. However, when you work with an outsourcing partner like ourselves, we try and utilise cloud-based software, keep it low cost, to ensure that obviously the finance and payment services are handled effortlessly by us and our payment services provider, yourselves, Modulr.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of those points resonates well with the conversations that I have with clients as well on a daily basis. So thank you for that. And Richard, as a membership organization, what are some of the most common concerns you hear from your members?
I think probably the one I should have mentioned at the top of the call was really around the national insurance contributions that are about to come in. That's about to devastate the sector, and potentially from the 1st of April, about 30% of the sector is technically on paper bankrupt overnight from the 1st of April. So that's a huge problem. The national minimum wage that we absolutely welcome as a sector to increase pay for our workforce is welcomed, but unfunded, it's a huge problem. I think depending on the size of care provider, it would depend on what the kind of the challenges and the real concerns are that you have. Some of the larger providers have been established through multiple acquisitions over the years, so they're running off of different systems and different technologies, so integrating onto one technology. Generally, they're integrating into one very old piece of technology that in a modern way is not necessarily suited to payment processing and payroll in the way in which you would probably want it to be done, as Victoria said, in a kind of a cloud environment. So that's a huge problem for a lot of the larger providers. Some of the smaller providers who make up about 80% of the sector, that's probably 10,000 plus care providers. They are very often run and led by people who've worked in the care sector. They're care brain thinkers. They're very compassionate people. They're not necessarily always commercially focused or the best business brains. And that's not being disrespectful, is that they provide amazing services, but we as a sector are very, very far behind probably other sectors who are far more commercial and forward thinking in the way in which they conduct their business. So some of the concerns is, how do we digitize? How do we maintain? How do we make progression and keep on top of technology at the pace of which is evolving? Because it's evolving at, I think, of every year is equivalent of 10 years, 20 years ago. Trying to keep up with that for some of these providers who are brilliant at providing care is really challenging for them.
Yeah, definitely, especially with the number of platforms that just come out on a yearly basis. It tends to get quite challenging to almost wrap your head around it. So thank you so much for that. And Victoria, this is probably one for you. So we've got broader challenges like regulatory pressures, increasing demand for services and staff turnover. How does that intersect with the need for improved payment solutions?
Obviously, having a streamlined payment solution allows the business to focus more on other areas, which Richard really well touched on, because, as he said, everyone is fantastic at the care aspect, especially where I work with the smaller SMEs. But obviously, an audit, and there's so many parts of the business that they need to focus on with CQC and council audits. But obviously, the finance department and payroll, so to speak, falls behind just a little bit. So I've been really trying to focus my efforts there to try and bring businesses up to speed with the technological advances that we have had. And then, using a payment system such as Modulr allows not just obviously a cost saving of bank fees and time. The time saving is approximately 80%. And I've got some real life feedback from some of the clients to obviously go through later. So yeah.
Lovely. 80% sounds like quite a lot, especially when you can be repurposing that in other areas to focus on the actual care that these providers provide. So thank you so much for that insight. So you've worked with, quite a few care clients so far. What are some of the traditional payment methods that they use?
It is normally very manual from what I've seen. Obviously, backs is a large proportion. I think mainly only when they're outsourcing to a payroll provider. I don't think many care companies just use backs on their own, but obviously when they're outsourcing, it is part of a major. I think the issue with backs is it's very, again, quite old school, so I would call it. But obviously we're moving to a faster payment solution, which I don't think a lot of care companies are aware exists, which is why we're here today. But from an actual perspective, payments obviously can be loaded very quickly onto Modulr in as little as a few minutes. And then we advise our clients of the total amount due for their staff, and they can just load that payment in one transaction. There's not, depending on how many staff you've got, you could have up to 50 members of staff. Manually typing those into your bank account now is just, yeah, to me, it's obsolete and a little bit crazy in this world that we're living in. So yeah, obviously this can take hours of release of manual payment uploads, and it works exactly the same for suppliers. So like you said, you partner with Sage and Xero, and obviously that can then fall through for suppliers, and it alleviates cash flow, because obviously by making these same day payments, you could get a receipt from the council, for example, or a care home, and then the payments can be loaded and released within 90 seconds. And to me, that's absolutely amazing. So it releases a lot of administration burden from those care companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. You made that sound quite simple in terms of digitizing that process and how it can go from 50 payments that you're manually entering to just a click of a couple of buttons. So yeah, thank you for that. And Richard,
I just would say on that point that I think some of the larger organisations are still using BACS as their default sort of process, because that's what they've always done. And it's like turning an oil tanker. It takes a long time for them to change and shift away from it. So some of the smaller providers and the smaller groups are far more agile in that space, but the larger ones are still looking at the traditional models, and they're paying the premiums for that sort of more old-fashioned way of kind of transacting payroll and electronic payments.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for the larger companies then, who are still using BACS, for example. How does that impact overall operational efficiency, you think, Richard?
I think it's just the amount of time. So a payment process will be kind of structured, routined, planned, scheduled, organised, signed off. It will go through various different levels of sign off on authorization, depending on how big the payment run is. There'll be audit and accounting thresholds where certain people have to sign off at certain levels. So it's not just as simple as, if you're a small 30-bed care home, it might be that your manager is your owner, and the owner can then sign off that process themselves. When you're in the larger organisations or groups, or you're multi-sites, then you've got to look at a lot of the information to consolidated. You've got to bring a lot of the information together from multiple disparate systems. Someone needs to check it, review it, double check it, review it again, make amendments, sign it off, go through the hierarchies. That's where the efficiency comes in, is actually just trying to make sure you've got something that's far more leaner and far more efficient. Cut the complexity, you cut the cost.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just all about streamlining that entire process, where you might have different stakeholders needing to do different things. We're just streamlining that entire process, so it just makes it a lot smoother, but also takes a lot less time.
Absolutely, but we've gone through, our organisation, our sector has grown through acquisition and divestment. So a lot of homes are buying up more homes and more groups. So you're buying up different systems and different processes. And because we're really focused on providing care, because our regulators are so on top of it, we sometimes forget the back office efficiencies, which over time become routine and normal. And you probably don't realise quite how burdensome and cumbersome they can be until you see a technology like Modulr that actually just creates real efficiency. And then you think, well, why have we been doing it this way for so long, when there's actually a really efficient way of processing the payments?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's all about, like education. Like, a lot of people don't even know that these kind of payment solutions actually exist in the market, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Victoria, have you had much experience with that side of things, where you've had to educate your clients on what's actually available in?
Yeah, all the time. Obviously, from an accountancy perspective, it happens on a day-to-day basis. And I do think a lot of businesses, not just in the care industry, are stuck in their ways and just used to, I suppose, plodding along, because there's so much other work at the front office that needs to be done that they forget about the back office. But as you touched on, a lot of the clients that I work with are not aware that even these platforms exist. So we always educate and make them aware. Obviously, we give them the option to go through the BACS through manual payment uploads, and also then Modulr. So we offer all options. But yeah, so that's my experience with it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Richard, another question for you. What impact do you think government policies and funding have on the adoption of digital solutions in the care sector?
an interesting one, because I think if I go back to what I said beforehand, we've got a lack of government funding in the system and the sector. So from a central government perspective, it wants us to digitise and transform, and we are digitising and transforming at a real pace within the sector, but it's largely unfunded. When we have like local authorities and NHS commissioners commissioning care, they look at the cost of providing care. They don't look at the cost of digital transformation. They don't look at the cost of investing in technologies and capital equipment to become more efficient. So care providers have to take that money from their own kind of return on capital or profits, or dig deep into their pockets to invest in technologies without it being funded. So it really comes down to government have set a mission, whether that's central government, local government, or the NHS. This is our mission. This is what we want you to achieve, care providers. You've got to go off and achieve it. But there's very rarely funding that goes with it. You do see some digital funds that are available, and you can apply for them. Digital Care Records is one of the funds that was, really looked at and funded over the last couple of years, and the sector's about 80% on digital transformation. But there's a lot more in the back office beyond just digital care records in terms of financial and account management. That's where a huge amount of efficiency comes in. And when care provider margins are so small, and if you're managing on a local authority only commission contract, you could be on a 1 to 3% net margin. Okay, that's a very tight margin. Efficiencies in the back office have a huge impact on the bottom line of a company, especially if maybe you're a home care organisation and 80% of your cost is payroll. If you can make a bit of efficiency there, that has a huge impact on the total cost. So for me, the issues are really around the funding, which prohibit care providers from acting at pace and really putting headspace into investing in projects that will create efficiencies further down the line.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Thank you. Okay. So, Victoria, we touched on this just a tiny bit just now, about what a typical payment journey usually looks like for a client. From an accounting side of things, when you like set up these payments for clients, or you're trying to send them those reports, what did that usually look like on your side?
Yeah, so it would be very much, we would provide them with a credit transfer file, and then most of the time they would literally just take that manual file and tap in the figures into the bank. There is instances where they do have an upload function with the bank. Again, that can be very costly, normally depending on the bank that you obviously are with. So yeah, most of it is manual or it is backs. Obviously, from a backs perspective, we would normally create the backs file, advise the client of the amount, send the backs file over to them. You can have multiple levels of authorization, as Richard touched on earlier, depending on how big the company is. It can have 1, 2, 3 authorizees on that account. So the main issue with backs is obviously the 3-day payment term, and then obviously the deadlines then come in with that. What I did do was speak to quite a few of my clients regarding this topic, and one of the main responses that I received was there's been less errors in the business previously that when they would utilise manual payment methods along sometimes backs, which has its own time constraints that I just touched on. They have said how much more efficient it is to use a fast payment system, having the flexibility to load payments via software rather than one by one, again, alleviates the risk of errors, which were happening too frequently prior to the implementation of Modulr, and then could be picked up months along the line rather than immediately, just because of the front office issues that we've discussed. So being able to have the flexibility of funding Modulr up to the same morning that the payments are released has been a complete game changer for a lot of my clients, due to, again, cash flow issues and delayed payments with councils or care providers.
Okay, yeah, quite a few things you touched on there. One thing that I have been chatting with my clients is usually about the human error side of things. So when you make a mistake, or when a shift hasn't been put in properly and you realize, you need to change it, how easily can that be rectified with backs?
With backs, not easily whatsoever. Because again, if we've got the cut-offs for 3-day payments, say the workers are meant to be paid on a Friday, Obviously, that BACS needs to be really loaded by Wednesday to make sure that the payments are made on time. Now, you'd have to revert back to manual payment. You wouldn't be able to pay by BACS again. So that is the main issue there with BACS. Whereas with Modulr, we could make the adjustment, as we are a payroll provider outsourced. We'd make the adjustment same day, load the payment, the client funds the payment, payments made within 90 seconds.
That's quite night and day difference, isn't it?
Night and day, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that. Richard, so we've talked a lot about technology. How do you see the role of technology evolving in the care sector over the next 5 years?
Technology is new technology is coming out at pace at the moment. So I think we'll probably see a huge amount of acquisition of technologies combining, and we'll see those that offer the greatest efficiency kind of floating to the top. There's a lot of tech out. There's a lot of tech developers. There's a lot of very clever people putting out a lot of very clever technology. So I think the evolution will be that the best will float to the top, and the best will be those that operate and offer the best level of efficiency to the customers. So those that are easiest to use, intuitive, that do what it says on the side of the tin, really, that deliver on their promise, and create efficiency for the care providers. I think are the ones that will float to the top.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Ease of use, definitely. Cool. So we've also touched on, some funding being a barrier to digital transformation. What other barriers are there to digital transformation in the care sector?
Well, I think if you look at the average age of staff in the sector, I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is now because I hadn't looked that up before I joined the call. But the average age is leaning towards the more mature. So we are possibly, I include myself in this, the less technologically mobile and agile people. So we have a workforce that doesn't always or hasn't always embraced technology. If you think of our care workforce, the vast majority, 80+% of our workforce are nurses and carers. They don't generally use technology to do their job in terms of systems. They don't sit behind computers. So they're not necessarily thinking digital transformation. So one of the biggest barriers is kind of like the staff, the reluctance. I think when people get technology and they see how it helps them, they embrace it. But there is a lot of technology that people are maybe slightly fearful of, that's kind of taking over some of their jobs and having to think about doing things differently. When you've worked in a sector that for the last 50, 60 years has had paper-based records, and you're now looking at a PDA device and you've got to do it on a device, that's a huge transformational shift. And it's only really been the last 5 years that we've seen that happen at pace. The majority of the workforce has been around for a while. It's a huge learning curve for the workforce. I think when you look at back office, we've probably got slightly more agile staff. But again, within care homes, certainly the smaller care homes, these are people who work in their local communities and live in their local communities. They probably haven't had corporate careers generally in large organizations that are really far more transformational digitally. These are people who are highly competent, highly credible, capable people, but they probably work in a slight bubble in some respects. So I think it's just that pace of change is very hard for the workforce to keep up with. A lot of them are doing an incredible job, but we are care-brained people. We're not always commercial-brained people, and they are different parts of the brain. We're great at delivering care, not always the best business leaders. But there are fantastic business leaders too, I will say that.
Absolutely. And how do you think this barrier can be overcome then?
I think in terms of overcoming the barrier, it's really about making sure that the technology is user-friendly, and it's not just. I review technology all the time in my role, and I'm getting more used to some of the terms and some of the lingo and some of the acronyms, but it's taken me a long time to understand some of that. And actually, I want people to speak in a really simple language to me. Don't give me the jargon. Give it to me simply. Tell me what I've got to do. Make it intuitive. Most of us have got a smartphone now. We can usually navigate, whether it's Android or Apple, you can navigate the apps because it's fairly intuitive. You can see what you're doing. And we need to make sure technology is intuitive, and it's idiot-proof for people like me of my generation who don't always think the way some of the younger generations think. We can't think about code. The clever people, behind the scenes do that. We need to think in kind of really clear, logical, functional steps that, you know, are obvious rather than have to be interpreted or implied.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely quite insightful. Victoria, how do you think accountants play a role in overcoming this barrier of adoption of technology?
I think again, it's just education. Richard touched very well on that subject. Obviously, now staff can log. They can go, especially in domiciliary care, they can go into the service user's house and scan a QR code. But sometimes it's not as easy as that because their phones are not up to date and they're not using the newer iPhones or Androids, and then they have to now upgrade their phones because obviously back in previous times it was literally all done on paper, and I do find that still some companies are adopting that method just because that's all they know. So yeah, it's going to be very difficult, I do think, to sometimes pull people out of old school methods. But yeah, we're trying from an accountancy and payroll perspective, and I do think that moving forward it will obviously become easier as we go along, especially now we've got AI and a lot more technological advancements coming into play.
I think there's also an opportunity of outsourcing as well. So sometimes if you can't always change the people's mindset, sometimes you have to change the way you do things. And this is where like, Victoria comes into play, where actually some of these activities that were done in-house before, you could actually put out and subcontract it to specialist firms like Victoria's, which I think, you know, a lot of the smaller providers need to think about doing. Why should we develop those skills in-house when actually we've got brilliant organisations out there who could do that for us?
Yeah, definitely. And Victoria's been, you know, doing a good job at that with her clients at the moment. Would you be able to share a real life example on the value you've gotten from implementing something like Modulr?
Of course, yeah. So one of our clients, I've reached out to quite a few, but I'll just give you two of the examples that I've obviously received back. So one of them stated that the system is very simple to use. They like the fact that we can load payments on their behalf. Obviously, adjustments can be done same day within a few hours, which also keeps the employees happy, as you can imagine, because being told that they're not going to get their bonus or overtime or a missing shift until their next pay day is not keeping your staff happy and motivated. So yeah, in terms of loading the payments, they just check the totals and then load one amount to the system. This actual client has said that it's saved him up to 5 hours per week, and he is a business owner. So that's quite a lot of time saved just by loading supplier payments and staff payments, and just being able to manually do that one payment into Modulr from the bank has saved him so much time. We also had a similar feedback from another client that had previously used the direct debit backs. He stated that mainly the visibility issue was the worst part on his side, and the fact that adjustments were not obviously good using backs, and then having to load manual payments into the bank. So now they feel like they've got a lot more control just by using the faster payment system.
That's some really good insight, especially when you talked about that time saving bit. 5 hours per week is such a massive time save. Definitely. Richard.
I just made a note of this a minute ago because I was on a call the other day actually, and another technology provider was talking to me about invoice payments and payroll. And on average, from a survey, around 80% of care providers are spending the equivalent of 12 days a year just amending payroll and invoices because of errors and issues and inaccuracy. So I think that's where the role of technology that's simplified comes in. You know, giving you 2 weeks more than 2.5 weeks of working time back to do more kind of helpful tasks. Huge amount of time wasted correcting errors and omissions.
Yeah, that's when you say it like that, 2.5 weeks a year, that's a lot of time, and that could obviously be used to do more meaningful activities. 100%. Definitely. Thank you so much for that. That was so insightful. Unfortunately, this is all we have time for today. To summarize, We've discussed some of the unique challenges that face the care industry, and despite these challenges, the care industry still continues to adapt and innovate, seeking new ways to enhance service delivery and improve outcomes for those that they serve. Embracing modern technologies, such as digital payment systems, can play a crucial role in addressing these challenges, streamlining operations, and ensuring that care providers can focus on what they do best, providing exceptional care. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. A huge thank you to Victoria and Richard for sharing your insights and expertise. I've definitely learned a lot today. If you'd like to explore how Modulr could work specifically for your business, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to set up a one-to-one session to discuss your unique needs and answer any questions. Please reach out to Victoria or Richard if you have any questions regarding Equalis or Care England. And you can also scan the QR code here to book a time in my diary if you wanted a one-to-one chat as well. Thank you so much, everyone, and hope you all have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.